All right, let's get started. It is 9:31. Anybody has any questions before we get going? Any issues? Anything? Hang in there, guys. It's getting close. Almost to the end. Almost to the end. All right, so we actually have a short lab today. We only have one lab to cover, just lab 11. And then next week, we're going to have already our second lab exam. Just double check here. So again, the lab exam is going to be the same format as the first one. So we're only going to cover, let's see here. Yeah, so we're only covering the brain, the ear, the eyes, and the heart. We already have talked about the brain, the ears, and the eyes. And today we're going to be talking about the heart, okay? We're going to be looking at the anatomy of the heart. We're going to be looking at the great vessels of the heart. We're going to be looking at the coronary circulation. And all of those things, they are going to be included in the next lab exam next week on Tuesday, okay? Same format. We're going to have a total of 50 questions. And I'm going to be using models and pictures of models, of human models. And you're going to have arrow pointing to a structure, and you need to be able to name the structure. Okay. Does anybody have any question about the second exam? All right. So let me share my PowerPoint with you. I just sent you an email a few minutes ago with the link for today's in-lab activity. And the activity today is just one video that we have on Edpuzzle. And the video is going to be covering looking at the model, a human model, and pointing out the different structures of the heart, okay? It is an important video that is going to help you prepare for the second exam, okay? Let me share my PowerPoint with you. So there's a lot of structures that we're going to be discussing today that you guys will come across next week, Tuesday, on the second exam, okay? And the good news is that we already went over the heart. We finished it up yesterday in the lecture. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be discussing right now is going to be a review. And it's not a bad thing since we have an exam coming up tomorrow. Okay. All right, guys, so let's look at the anatomy of the heart. So we're going to focus on that since the exam for the lab is all about anatomy. Then we're going to look at the coronary circulation. And I'm going to be pointing out some of the important blood vessels of the coronary circulation that I do want you guys to know. This can be a little difficult sometimes. Excuse me. It can be a little difficult sometimes to point them out in a model. So I do want you guys to pay extra attention and to pay extra time looking at the coronary circulation, identifying them, and being able to name them. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the physiology of how our heart works, okay? Now, in terms of the position of our heart, we know that our heart is located within our thoracic cavity, and our heart is between the second and the fifth rib. And although we have this tendency to assume that our heart is on the left side of the body, that is not completely true. Just by looking at this picture here, this cartoon, so we can see that yes, most of the heart is on the left side. About 2/3 of the heart is on the left side, but we still have a section of the heart, a third of the heart that is on the right side of the chest, okay? our heart sits in a position that we call a mediastinum. And it's important to understand that the mediastinum is not a membrane. Okay, the membrane that surrounds the heart, and we're going to look at it again, is what we call the pericardial membrane. But there is a position within the thoracic cavity called the mediastinum in which the heart is located. Okay, our heart sits right on top of the diaphragm, and is in fact, it is actually attached with the diaphragm. So every time that we inhale and exhale, our heart moves also up and down together with the lungs, okay? If we look at the overall shape of the heart, we see that the heart has a triangular shape to it. And we can come in here and draw a triangle on top of the heart. And this is important because that helps to describe certain structures of the heart, okay? Several of the structures of the heart, they are bilateral. So you need to know, you need to tell me if it is the right or if it is the left, okay? And a way to make that determination is by looking at what we call the apex of the heart. So the apex of the heart, which is this end here of the heart, it is pointing towards the left side of the body, okay? While the base of the heart is pointing towards the right side of the body. So here we are looking at the nice cartoonish representation of our heart, and we can see some of those coronary blood vessels here on the surface of the heart, and we're going to go over them. And we can also see several of the great vessels of the heart that take blood in and out of the heart, okay? Now, when we dissect the heart, we can see that our heart has a total of 4 chambers. And these chambers here, they're going to be pushing blood from one place to another until the blood either gets to the lung to become oxygenated, or the blood is going to go through the rest of the body through the systemic circulation, okay? So we have a total of 2 atria. We have the right atrium. Atria is plural. Atrium is singular. So we have a right atrium and a left atrium. And we also have 2 ventricles. We have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. We have right here, separating the ventricles, we have this thick wall. This is what we call the intraventricular septum, or the intraventricular wall, okay? Separating the right and the left ventricle, right? We also have an intraatrial septum, or the interatrial wall, separating the right and the left atria. Now, we can pass an imaginary line right through that intraventricular septum and then go past the apex of the heart here. And this is the best visual aid for you to make the determination what is the right, what is the left of the heart. Keeping in mind that we might not always look at a heart from an anterior view, like what we're looking at right here. So you might have a heart in front of you in which the heart is by itself, is not in the body, not in the chest, and you might have a lateral view, or you might have a posterior view of the heart. So then how are you going to make the determination what is right, what is left? Well, you're going to be looking for the apex, okay? Now, let's look at some of the major blood vessels, the great vessels of the heart that are bringing blood in and out of the heart. So we have right here on the superior aspect of the right atrium, we have what we call the superior vena cava. And the superior vena cava is bringing deoxygenated blood from the neck and the head region, okay? And dumping that deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. Then in an inferior aspect, we have the inferior vena cava that is bringing the oxygenated blood from the rest of the body. Now, it's important to point out that all of the deoxygenated blood from our body, it will be dumped inside the right atrium. All of the blood from all of our body, the deoxygenated, will arrive inside the right atrium, okay? Now, from the right atrium, this blood is going to pass through a valve right over here. We're going to talk about this valve, and then it's going to enter the right ventricle. It is extremely important to understand the flow of the blood through the heart. Okay, where is it going from one point to another? Where does it end up? What type of circulation is this? Okay. From the right ventricle, now the blood is going to pass through another valve right over here. And now it's going to enter what we call the pulmonary trunk, which is the section right over here. Okay. Now we can see that this pulmonary trunk is going to split into two branches. We have a branch going towards the left side, and we have a branch going towards the right side. This branches here, when the pulmonary trunk branches to the right and the left, these are what we call the pulmonary arteries. So we have the left pulmonary artery, and we have the right pulmonary artery. Now, why do we call these arteries? We call them arteries because the blood is being taken away from the heart. And in this case here, because this is an artery of the pulmonary circulation, these arteries, they are labeled blue because they're carrying the oxygenated blood, okay? Now, this blood is going to be sent all the way to the lungs. And the lung is going to take the blood, is going to oxygenate the blood, and is going to remove the carbon dioxide. And when we exhale, we're going to get rid of the carbon dioxide. And now this blood is oxygenated again, and this blood needs to return to the heart. And it's going to return to the heart through what we call the pulmonary veins, okay? And same situation, we have two pulmonary veins on the left side. So we have the left pulmonary veins, and we have the right pulmonary veins. Why are these veins? They're veins because they're bringing blood back to the heart. Now, all of that oxygenated blood is going to arrive right here in the left atrium from the left pulmonary and the right pulmonary. And we can see the opening here, but it's on the back of the heart. Okay, eventually gets right in here. From the left atrium, this oxygenated blood now is going to pass through another valve into the left ventricle. And now the left ventricle is going to squeeze, pushing this blood yet through another valve, a fourth valve, into the ascending aorta. As I mentioned in the lecture, when you are describing the aorta, either in an exam or a quiz, make sure that you are precise. So make sure that you are pointing out what specific section of the aorta I am pointing to, okay? If it is the ascending aorta, if it is the aortic arc or the arc of the aorta, or if it is the descending aorta, okay? So now that this oxygenated blood is in the aorta, it's going to be distributed again all over the body, all right? Any questions, guys? All right. So as I mentioned, we have different types of circulation in the blood. We have three different types. You know, oftentimes when we think about blood circulation, we think of the systemic, but the systemic circulation is not the only one, okay? The systemic circulation is a circulation of blood between the heart and all over the body. But we also have a pulmonary circulation, and we have a coronary circulation as well, okay? Now, in the systemic circulation, the arteries are labeled red because they're carrying oxygenated blood, while the veins are labeled blue because they're carrying deoxygenated blood. But we can see right here that in the pulmonary circulation, that is the opposite. The arteries are blue for carrying deoxygenated blood, and the veins are red for carrying oxygenated blood, okay, back to the heart. In the coronary circulation, it's going to be similar to the systemic. In the coronary circulation, the arteries are red because they're carrying oxygenated blood, and the veins are blue, okay? All right, so let's look at the coronary circulation. First, we're going to go over the coronary arteries. And then in the next slide, we're going to go over the coronary veins, all right? There's going to be 6 coronary arteries and 3 coronary veins that I want you guys to know by name. I'm going to point them out, okay? Now, the first thing, very important, every time that you are labeling something, again, either on an exam or a quiz, first thing you do, make sure you understand right and left. Once you have that out of the way, then you go in and you label the structure, okay? Because that is very important. You might be missing half a point just because you are either mislabeling right or left or not putting right or left at all. So get that out of the way, okay? Now, we're going to see here that from the ascending aorta, we're going to have 2 major blood vessels of the coronary artery that are literally siphoning oxygenated blood straight from the ascending aorta. We're going to have a right coronary right here, siphoning blood on the right side of the ascending aorta, and we're going to have the left coronary artery, which is going to be siphoning blood from the left side and supplying blood to the left side of the heart, okay? Now, there are several branches here of the coronary arteries, but I'm just going to focus on some of them, some of the most important ones, okay? Now, we're going to see right here that this coronary artery, the right coronary artery, is going to come all the way here on the right side of the heart, and then it's going to come to this major point right here, in which this right coronary artery is going to split into 2. We're going to have a section, a branch of the right coronary artery, which is going to be supplying blood to the inferior anterior aspect of the heart. And then we're going to have another branch, which is going to go towards the back side of the heart, okay, on the right side. The section of the coronary that is coming here towards the front of the heart, this is what we call the marginal branch, which is right here. So if you're looking at the heart from the front in an anterior view, we can see the marginal branch right there in the front. The section of the right coronary that is going towards the back side of the heart, the posterior aspect, this is what we call the posterior interventricular branch, okay? Now looking on the left side, so the major blood vessel is the left coronary. In same situation, the left coronary is going to split into 2 major branches. We have the branch that is coming towards the front of the heart, and that is what we call the anterior interventricular branch, right over here. And then we have a section going towards the back of the heart, and that is the circumflex branch, okay? Now, a myocardial infarction or a heart attack is when there is some type of a blockage to any of these coronary arteries. It could be a blockage right here, which means that there's no blood supply to the section of the heart. And as we have seen in the lecture, you can either do an angioplasty, which is the crushing or the removal of that blockage, or you might need to have a coronary bypass. Now let's look at the coronary veins, which are part of the coronary circulation. And the first thing I want you guys to understand is that all of this blood, the deoxygenated blood now, that is being used up by the heart cells, and then is going to be collected by the coronary veins. This deoxygenated blood is going to be dumped also right here in the right atrium, together with all the other deoxygenated blood from the body, okay? Now, the major coronary vein that is running right next to the anterior interventricular artery is going to be what we call the great cardiac vein. The great cardiac vein, and I pointed out for you here, is coming towards the front of the heart. So this is the one right over here. And then we have a major coronary vein that is going towards the back side of the heart. And we can see it right here. And that's what we call the coronary sinus, going towards the back. And then this coronary sinus comes down here towards the inferior aspect of the heart. And that is what we call the middle cardiac vein. Okay. And guys, here I have in this slide an anterior and a posterior view of the heart, so that again, you can have a better look at those different coronary arteries and the coronary veins that you guys are responsible for, that I wanted to know for the exam. Okay, and you can find all of them here. Any questions, folks? All right. So moving on, let's now look at the heart valves. And this is also a very important part of the exam for the lab exam next week, Tuesday, in which you need to make sure that you are able to identify the heart valves, be able to name them, and be able to identify some of the structures that are associated with the heart valves, okay? So we have a total of 4 heart valves. 2 of them are what we call the atrioventricular valves, or the AV valves, and the other 2 are what we call the semilunar valves, or the SL valves, okay? You need to make sure that you are labeling these the appropriate way, right? So we're gonna have a right atrioventricular valve that is separating the right atrium from the right ventricle, and we're gonna have a left atrioventricular valve that is separating the left atrium from the left ventricle. Now, again, as I mentioned in the lecture, these AV valves, they also can go by another name. The right AV is also known as the tricuspid because it has 3 cusps, or 3 flaps right here that makes up this opening of the valve. Or the left AV valve is also known as the bicuspid because it has 2 cusps, or also known as the mitral valve, okay? Now, you don't have to use all the names. When you're labeling this, it's not, let's say if I'm asking to label this valve, and I say this and I keep repeating, and then I know that it's still gonna make the mistake, so don't do that. This is not the right AV tricuspid valve. It is either the right AV or it is the tricuspid. It is also wrong to say that this is the right tricuspid valve. Why? Because if you say that this is the right tricuspid, you are implying that there is a left tricuspid, and there is no left tricuspid valve, okay? The words matter. It is important to do it correctly. Same situation for the left AV. It is either the left AV, the bicuspid, or the mitral. If you put down there the left bicuspid or the left mitral, you'll have a point taken away from it, because that is not correct, okay? Now, also make sure that you understand the difference between the valve and this strings that are attached to the valve that helps the valve opening and close. The valves are right here, right in between the atriums and the ventricles. Then stretching from the valves over here, we have the chordae tendineae. And when I'm gonna label this here in the exam or a quiz, I'm gonna do it so that there's no misunderstanding if I'm pointing to the valve or if I'm pointing to the chordae tendineae, okay? So this chordae tendineae, they are involved with helping with the opening and closing of the valve. And this chordae tendineae, they are also bilateral structures. So when you're labeling this here on an exam, on a quiz, and if I'm pointing, let's say, to this chordate tendon here, you need to tell me that this is the chordate tendon of the left AV, or the chordate tendon of the bicuspid, or the chordate tendon of the mitral valve. Okay? It is not enough just to say the chordate tendon, because again, these are bilateral structures. Same situation with the little muscle in which the chordate tendon is anchored to inside the ventricles. These little muscles are what we call the papillary muscles. And these are also bilateral structures. So we have papillary muscles of the left AV, of the left ventricle, or we have the papillary muscles of the right ventricle. Okay? So you need to go a step further and make sure that you're being specific when you're labeling them. Any questions, guys, so far? Am I being clear? All right. Now, the other two heart valves that we have, these are the semilunar valves. And so we don't have a left SL valve or right SL valve. We have a pulmonary SL valve, and the pulmonary SL valve separates the right ventricle from the pulmonary trunk. And we also have an aortic SL valve, and the aortic SL valve separates the left ventricle from the ascending aorta. Okay. Let's look now at some of these fibers and some of the way in which this electrical impulse that allows for the heart to contract, how does it spread throughout the heart and allows for the cardiac cycle. And I mentioned that we have right here inside the right atrium, we have a group of cells. And this group of cells forms a node that is called the sinoatrial node, or the SA node. Now, this SA node, they're special, and the cells are special because these cells here, they have the capacity to generate their own action potential. They create on a regular interval its own action potential, electricity. And then that electricity, those electrical impulses, they're going to spread all the way here from the SA node throughout the entire heart. But it happens in a very organized manner, from the superior aspect of the heart down the inferior aspect of the heart. Okay? So from the SA node, the action potential is going to travel to the left atrium, and also going to travel down here in the right atrium to another node. And this node here is what we call the atrioventricular node, the AV node. So this AV node now is going to take that action potential and is going to propagate it through a series of nerves that are embedded on the walls of the ventricles. Okay, so it's going to start right here in the interventricular septum through what we call the bundle of His. And then this bundle of His is going to split into two nerves, two sections. And the sections are what we call the bundle branches. So we have the left, the bundle branch, and we have the right, the bundle branch. And then these bundle branches, they're going to go all the way down to the apex of the heart. And when they get to the apex, they're going to make a U-turn, and they're going to go upwards. Okay. And now this section is what we call the Purkinje fibers, as it goes and innervates the outer wall of the ventricles. Now, we're all familiar with the typical heart sound. You know, when we listen to a heart sound, we all understand and know well what they sound like. And our heart sound makes what we call the lub-dub sound. So we have this first louder, more pronounced, longer sound, followed by a shorter, fainter sound of the heart. Now, what exactly causes the heart sound? Can anybody tell me? What exactly are we listening to when we hear a heart sound, a heart beating? What are we listening to? What is causing the sound?
Something with the valves.
Something with the valves. Okay, you got half a point.
Is it the opening of the valves?
It is actually the closing. Okay, so that when the valves close, so after they open, when they close, that is actually what makes the heart sound. Okay, and the louder sound, the lab sound, which we also call the S1 sound, this sound is made when the AV valves close. Both of them, the right AV and the left AV, which by the way, they both close at the same time, okay? Because both the left and the right ventricle is gonna contract and squeeze at the same time, pushing blood from the ventricles either into the pulmonary trunk or into the ascending aorta, okay? Now the other sound, the S2 sound, is the closing of the SL valves, okay? So it's a more faint sound and it's a shorter sound, and that is the sound of the SL, both of them, the pulmonary and the aortic, closing at the same time. When you go to the doctor and the doctor has a stethoscope and is listening, put the diaphragm, the metal end, the cold metal end of the stethoscope, and start listening, moving the diaphragm around. What the doctor is listening to is listening for the heart sound, is listening for the opening and closing of your valves. And we have specific, what is called auscultation sites. What are these auscultation sites? Auscultation sites are specific positions around our heart that doctors and scientists have already mapped out, in which we're going to be able to listen to each one of the separate valves. The aortic valve, the pulmonary valve, the tricuspid valve, the bicuspid valve. And you can see right here that the auscultation sites, which are shown here in red, they are not superimposed with the anatomical position of the valves. They are away from the valves, okay? The valves, the anatomical position of the valves would be here. So these auscultation sites are away from the anatomical position of the valves because our heart is surrounded by a rib cage, and the sound bounces around, it hits the bone and bounces around the chest, okay? Very briefly here, let's go over the ECG and the cardiac cycle. And ECG stands for what, guys? What does ECG stands for?
Electrocardiogram.
Electrocardiogram, absolutely. Okay, so let's do a little study session here. Does anybody want to walk us through the ECG? What does each one of those little peaks here represent? Since we have an exam tomorrow, and if I was a betting man, I would bet there's going to be questions related to this in the exam. Nobody here plans to be a teacher one day? It's great. You get to talk for hours. Help me out here. What does the P wave represent? Which is the beginning of the ECG. Don't be shy.
The atrial depolarization.
The atrial depolarization. Can you explain what the atrial depolarization means? What is happening with the atriums when it depolarizes?
Does it contract?
It will happen after the atrial depolarization, absolutely. But physiologically speaking, and physiologically mean, what's happening with the cells. So what happens to the cells of the atria, both the right and the left, when they become depolarized? What does it mean by being depolarized? And that's the type of understanding that I want you guys to have. And it's not memorization, right? It's really understanding. What is the depolarization of a membrane is? And we talked about that when we talk about skeletal muscle contraction. We talked about that again when we talk about communication of the neurons, and we talk about that again when we talk about the contraction of the cardiac muscles. What's
It has
basically,
something to
go ahead.
do with the. It has something to do with the things changing from positive to negative.
Yes, it has. It's actually the other way around, from negative to positive. I see like information. You guys got some of that information in there. You need to put all of that and combine all of that together. And it's not just to pass an exam. It's not just to pass a class. I mean, this is not why we go to school, right? Or it shouldn't be just to pass and then go to the next class. It's actually to take this information with you. And I don't know what you guys want to do. A lot of you folks want to be nurses or doctors or be within the health field. So now is the time to take that information and retain that information and carry that on with you, not just passing the class. So depolarization really means the opening of the sodium channels. And when the sodium channels open, that is going to allow the sodium to go inside of the cell. And sodium is a positive ion, right? And then inside of the cell, right across the membrane, is going to turn from negative to positive. And outside of the cell is going to turn from positive to negative at very, very short temporary manner, okay? And this change, what we call change in the polarization across the membrane from negative to positive and positive to negative, that creates action potential. That creates, it generates an electrical impulse. It generates a shock, okay? And that shock, that electrical impulse is action potential. So that is what we mean. And when we say atrial depolarization, it means that all the cells of the atria, all of the sodium channels, they start opening up, allowing the sodium to get inside of the cell. Now, after that happens, after the depolarization, then we're going to have the contraction of those muscle cells. Okay, so this is why we say that the steps are depolarization, contraction, repolarization, relaxation. Okay, so you need to be able to separate each one of those events and understand what is happening with the cell at each step. Now, as soon as now the atrial becomes depolarized and then the atria will contract, then squeezing the blood from the atria into the ventricles. Then what needs to happen here with the atria? The atria needs to repolarize. And when the atria repolarize, what does repolarization mean? Repolarization means that now the sodium channels will close again, and it's going to stop the influx of sodium inside of the cell. And then the cell is going to go back to the resting membrane potential with the help of the what? With the help of the sodium potassium pump, which keeps pumping 3 sodium outside of the cell, 2 potassium inside of the cell, reestablishing the resting membrane potential, in which outside of the cell is positive, inside of the cell is negative. And then it's going to do the cycle all over again. Okay, it's going to go through that constant depolarization, repolarization, depolarization, repolarization. All right. An ECG, it does not measure muscle contraction. It does not measure tension in the cardiac muscle. This happens because of the depolarization and repolarization. But all that the ECG is picking up it is picking up that change in the membrane potential. Okay, it is picking up the depolarization and the repolarization, because an ECG is measuring electrical impulse going through the heart, not the contraction. But we do know that it happens. It is the automatic result of a depolarization. The same way that a relaxation is an automatic result of repolarization of the membrane. Okay. So the P wave, again, is an atrial depolarization, which immediately is going to lead to atrial contraction. And then we're going to have atrial repolarization. However, as I mentioned before, because the atrial repolarization signal, it happens very close to the ventricular depolarization, we are not going to see it. We don't see atrial repolarization in an ECG. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. It happens. Otherwise, the atrium would not relax. Okay? It does happen, we just don't see it because it's very close right here to this big signal, which is ventricular depolarization. So the R is ventricular depolarization. What's going to happen immediately after ventricular depolarization? The ventricles will contract. After the ventricles contract, now we're going to have a ventricular repolarization. And the ventricular repolarization is represented by the, by the T wave right here in the ECG. Okay. Now, if I ask you, what does physically happens to the ventricles after ventricular repolarization? The ventricles will relax, and the whole cycle is going to start again. Okay. Any questions, guys? See, how come I ask, every time I explain something, I ask, any questions? And then there's no question. And then when I ask you guys to explain it back to me, you can't explain it. So again, if this stuff is very clear to me, I've been teaching this for a while, but I need to make sure that I'm able to pass that information to you and you are understanding the explanation. But if I don't get any feedback from you at all, what am I to assume? I am to assume that you understood. And that doesn't apply just to my class. You should take that with you every class that you take, okay? Because, you know, it's our job, and I'm paid to explain this stuff to you guys. But if you are not an informed consumer, you know, you need to be able to say, you know what, I didn't understand. Can you explain that one more time so I can get it? You guys need to be, and I mentioned this at the very first day of class, you need to be a participant learner. You can't just sit back and wait for the information to get to you, okay? So let's watch this little video here that describes again a little bit more about the ECG and the cardiac cycle.
The cardiac conduction system consists of the following components: the sinoatrial node, or SA node, located in the right atrium near the entrance of the superior vena cava. This is the natural pacemaker of the heart. It initiates all heartbeat and determines heart rate. Electrical impulses from the SA node spread throughout both atria and stimulate them to contract. The atrioventricular node, or AV node, located on the other side of the right atrium, near the AV valve. The AV node serves as electrical gateway to the ventricles. It delays the passage of electrical impulses to the ventricles. This delay is to ensure that the atria have ejected all the blood into the ventricles before the ventricles contract. The AV node receives signals from the SA node and passes them onto the atrioventricular bundle, AV bundle, or bundle of His. This bundle is then divided into right and left bundle branches, which conduct the impulses toward the apex of the heart. The signals are then passed onto Purkinje fibers, turning upward and spreading throughout the ventricular myocardium. Electrical activities of the heart can be recorded in the form of electrocardiogram, ECG, or EKG. An ECG is a composite recording of all the action potentials produced by the nodes and the cells of the myocardium. Each wave or segment of the ECG corresponds to a certain event of the cardiac electrical cycle. When the atria are full of blood, the SA node fires, electrical signals spread throughout the atria and cause them to depolarize. This is represented by the P wave on the ECG. Atrial contraction, or atrial systole, starts about 100 milliseconds after the P wave begins. The PQ segment represents the time the signals travel from the SA node to the AV node. The QRS complex marks the firing of the AV node and represents ventricular depolarization. Q wave corresponds to depolarization of the interventricular septum. R wave is produced by depolarization of the main mass of the ventricles. S wave represents the last phase of ventricular depolarization at the base of the heart. Atrial repolarization also occurs during this time, but the signal is obscured by the large QRS complex. The ST segment reflects the plateau in the myocardial action potential. This is when the ventricles contract and pump blood. The T wave represents ventricular repolarization immediately before ventricular relaxation or ventricular diastole. The cycle repeats itself with every heartbeat.
All right. Any questions, guys? Okay. So that's all that I had for the lecture today. So what I'm going to do next, I sent you again the email earlier today, and you just have one video to watch on Add Puzzle. Make sure you watch it until the end. It is an important video because it's going to walk you through a human model of the heart, which is very similar to what I'm going to be using for the exam. Okay. After you're done with the Add Puzzle, then you're going to jump on Lima and you're going to take the quiz. There's only one quiz for today, and that is open. And after you're done with the quiz, you're good to go. Are we good? All right, guys. So I'm going to mute myself and let me know if you have any questions. Okay.